Welcome to Parenting GPS. I'm Kari Kling. We live in a world where children have such competition in terms of their time, their activities, and so many times parents just feel a little like, what do I do? How do I fit all of this in? And yet, one of the most important activities that we can engage our children in is the love of reading, and to help them understand why reading is so important, and to try to encourage them to have that passion to read. My guest today, Dr. Danny Brassell, is going to share with you why this is so important and what parents can do without it feeling like, oh, one more thing that I have to focus on because I don't have time to do anything else. So I'm going to introduce him to you right now. Dr. Danny Brassell is a highly sought after speaker, trainer, and coach known as Jim Kari with a Ph.D. Dr. Danny Brassell has spoken to over 3,500 audiences worldwide and authored 16 books, including his latest, Leadership Begins with Motivation. He helps entrepreneurs, executives, and small business owners boost their business and impact by improving their communication skills. As a thank you for joining us today, Danny would like to give you a complimentary ebook of Read, Lead, and Succeed, which provides inspirational quotes, stories, as well as adult and children's level book recommendations, and access to a 5-day reading challenge, which is a digital training for parents that are interested. Danny, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much for having me, Carrie. And more importantly, thanks for all that you're doing to spread joy in the world. There's a lot of parents that appreciate everything you do.
Oh, well, that is so kind of you to say. And this is my passion, and I'm so happy to have the opportunity to do it. I just shared your bio with our guests, our viewers. But one of the things I didn't say is you also have the title of being America's leading reading. Say that 5 times fast. America's leading reading ambassador. And I'd like to begin by asking you how did that title come to be, and when and how did you become so passionate about reading?
Well, thank you for that question, Carrie. It's ironic that they dubbed me that because I grew up hating reading. My father was a librarian. I always hated the public library. It always smelled funny. The furniture was always uncomfortable. There was always some elderly woman telling me to be quiet. There's always a freaky homeless guy, thought he was a vampire, hanging out by the bookshelves. I always hated the public library. And it wasn't until I actually started teaching in the inner city in South Central Los Angeles where I saw a lot of my students didn't have a lot of the advantages I had growing up. I mean, I was very blessed, Carrie. My family, we weren't wealthy by any means, but we always had food on the table. Both of my parents were in the home, and my parents always read in front of us kids, to us kids, and we always had plenty of access to reading materials. And so that really became my passion. Is I'm like, this isn't fair. Every kid deserves those opportunities. Whether you take them or not, that's another matter. But I love getting people to love reading, and really now one of my passions. School districts will bring me in for 2 days. Day one, I'll work with the teachers. Day two, I'll work with the administrators. But on the night of day one, I work with the parents because I think you need all three of those players on the same page. And that is how we move mountains together. And so I like to provide practical tips and strategy. Well, I shouldn't say tips. I, I always tell my students, waiters get tips. I give strategies. So I'm going to give you strategies to get your kids to read more, read better, and most importantly, to love reading.
It's so important, and I'm just bursting on the inside with so many things that I want to talk with you about. And before we give parents those strategies, not the tips, but the strategies, would you please spend a few minutes and share with us about why it's so important to get kids to read? So many times the emphasis is on how we get kids to read, but you talk more about the why. Would you please delve into that for us?
Yeah, there's plenty of readers that don't necessarily become leaders, but I have never read a biography of a successful leader that was not also a very avid reader. And it doesn't matter what the profession. I mean, you look at in the military, people like General Patton used to read all the time. General Eisenhower was reading about military strategy. They say General Schwarzkopf could actually quote Shakespeare voraciously and read in 4 languages. In business, modern entrepreneurs like Elon Musk is said to still read at least 1 book a day, often up to 3 books a day. Warren Buffett spends his entire day reading. Even in athletics, I could have kissed LeBron James before the NBA Finals when he was playing for Miami. They showed him in the locker room reading The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins. I'm like, man, this guy just did more for reading than I can do my entire life. I just see it in all walks of life, and that's why it's important. And there's all kinds of different strategies. I mean, in the research, and I know you're familiar with this too. A lot of people don't know that over half of the Fortune 500 CEOs in the world are dyslexic. And just because you're dyslexic doesn't mean you can't read. You and I understand that dyslexic students tend to process information a lot better through their ears. And so that's one of the strategies I share with parents is, well, put in an audiobook. The kid can listen to the books. One of my mentors was a guy named Jim Trelease, who unfortunately passed away, but he wrote one of the most important books I've ever read on how to get kids to love reading. It's called the Read Aloud Handbook. And there's tons of research that shows that the way kids are made readers is on the laps of their parents. And so I just think that reading is essential to everything. And I also think when we're talking about the why, it's really important to broaden the definition of literacy. I mean, unfortunately, the American public school system tends to emphasize literature, which is great. Literature is wonderful, but that's only one form of reading. You know, I can't think of a single employer that will come up to you and say, Kari, I need you to read this novel by tomorrow. No, they have other types of reading. You were sharing with me earlier that your son, who hated reading growing up, now that he's a college student, he reads voraciously about finance. He loves stock reports. He loves personal development books. That's wonderful. Some people, when I used to volunteer at a juvenile detention facility for teenage girls, they said, there's no way you're going to get these girls reading. I got them reading in a week. We'd read in the back of Us magazine. There's this funny section called The Fashion Police, where they show all these celebrities dressed up, and these comedians are ripping them apart. And these girls just thought it was the funniest thing, and that's what you do. You know, I always say this to people. You know, the little boy who only reads Captain Underpants is going to become a better reader than the little boy who reads nothing. I mean, Captain Underpants is the gateway drug to Shakespeare, but you got to get the kid interested first. And so I know that's a long answer to a short question, but that's why you need to read.
It's a perfect answer. And you know, we're going to share as the show goes on so many strategies. And one of the goals that I have for my show, Danny, is I want it to be doable for parents, no matter what the topic of the show is. I really want parents to finish watching and say, I can do that right now. I can do that tonight. I don't need any special materials. I don't need any special training. And we're going to give parents lots of ideas. We're going to talk about the why a little bit more and share some statistics with people, because I think it's so important. You don't have to do a lot. You know, you can do little things that make an enormous difference. And so when we come back from the break, we're going to dive right in and begin to share those with our parents, our viewers. Thank you. In the first segment, Danny, we talked a little bit, we started to talk a little bit about, there's some statistics that I think are really, really important for parents to know, because I want parents to realize that it doesn't take a lot to really improve a child's reading and increase their passion. Could you share those statistics with us, please?
Oh, certainly, Kari. So I have the world's top reading engagement program, and it's basically in just over 2 months we show kids how to read more, read better, and love reading. Because I find that schools in America do an adequate job of teaching kids how to read, but the question I always ask people is, what good is it teaching a kid how to read if they never want to read? I teach kids why to read, because I've never had to tell a kid turn on the TV. I've never had to tell a kid, go play a video game. And I never want to have to tell a kid, go read. I want them to choose to do it because they love it. And so the two numbers I always share with parents are 67 and 20. So we'll start with the number 67. A lot of people say it takes 21 days to change a habit. And I say, show me the research. I know exactly where the number comes from. It comes from a wonderful book written in 1960 by Dr. Maxwell Maltz called Psychocybernetics. And in the preface to that book, Dr. Maltz, who was a plastic surgeon, noted that he had observed it took most of his patients about 21 days to get used to their new faces. Well, a lot of personal development self-help gurus, a lot of people I respect, by the way, started telling people it took 21 days to change a habit. That number is completely fabricated. It's based on observation, not on research. Well, in 2009, researchers at the University of London did a habit formation study, and they found it took anywhere from 18 to 254 days to change a habit, and the average was 66 days. Well, I don't like the number 66, so I threw in a bonus day, 67. And it depends on the type of habit you're trying to change. So, for example, if you want to drink a glass of water before breakfast every morning, Kari, that might take 18 days to form that into a habit. But if you want to quit smoking, that's going to take 254 days. And here's why this is important to me. Let's say you go on a diet, you follow it religiously for 21 days, but then on day 22, you fall off the wagon. You blame yourself, which is wrong because the research shows it takes at least 3 times that long on average for most people to form a habit. And so my entire program was developed in just over 2 months, showing parents a quick little video strategy every single day that they could do at home with their kid. The second number, 20, this is even more important. So researchers around the world were looking at the habits of successful students. They tried to find common characteristics, and they found one that startled them. It was the number of minutes spent reading outside of school. They looked at the low kids, the average kids, and the high kids. So the kids in the 20th percentile, your lowest students, your F students, they average less than a minute a day reading outside of school. That didn't surprise anybody. That's probably why the kids were at the bottom of the class. But the second number did astound the researchers. The kids in the middle of the class, the C students, the 70th percentile, they average 9.6 minutes a day reading outside of school. And so when I'm doing a live training, this is when parents start looking at one another and the first hand raises and a parent says, well, wait a second, are you saying if I can get my kid to read 10 minutes a day, I can take him from an F to a C? That's exactly what I'm saying. There is a lot of research to support this, but this next number astounded the researchers. The kids in the 90th percentile, your A minus students, some of the best students in your class, do they spend 3 hours a day reading outside of school? No. Do they spend 1 hour a day reading outside of school? No. The average was just over 20 minutes a day. 20 minutes a day. That's what I'm always trying to show parents. And so here's 2 things parents need to know about. I already told you one of them. First of all, reading aloud to a kid is just as good as them reading on their own. So you can read aloud to them. Second of all, it doesn't matter how the minutes are distributed. You can do 3 minutes here, 5 minutes there. I mean, so I had a parent the other day, and it takes her 10 minutes to drive her son to school both ways. And I said, put in an Audible book on the way to and from school. You just covered your 20 minutes. And so these are numbers. The thing I appreciate about you, Kari, is you don't need a PhD to follow the strategies that you're providing parents. I mean, it was either Socrates or Keanu Reeves who once said, license to fish, a license to drive a car, but any idiot can become a parent. Well, now that I'm a parent, that's been proven true. But in defense of parents, nobody gives them a manual at the hospital. And so I'm a Baptist in the front row saying amen. I like giving practical strategies. I mean, these strategies work. I've worked with illiterate parents that can get their kids to become better readers, and they don't even know how to read themselves. These strategies work. I've done it with tens of thousands of parents and kids. I know it'll work with everybody watching the show right now.
So awesome. And you know, the big thing, if you don't remember all of the numbers, remember it's just a little bit more of getting your child to read. You read with them, an Audible book, as you said, and it can make an enormous difference in terms of grades, in terms of their comprehension, and most importantly to me, is the why are you reading? In fact, really quick story about that, and I know we were going to talk about screen time. Let's take that into the next segment, because I want to just share this with you because it fits right in here about what you said about the why and the passion. There seems, and also about parenting, there seems to be, and I know we have a question about this at the end, this competition with parents about, well, my child's reading at this level, well, my child's reading at this level. And if I could wave a magic wand, I want to ask parents and teachers, you know what? There's a lot of research. I don't have it at the tip of my tongue, but I used to know it, that if you look at kids in kindergarten, first grade, and second grade, and then you look at where all the kids are in third grade, so many of those levels kind of average out. And so just because your child is, an advanced reader early on doesn't necessarily mean that, but it's about getting them to love reading, and then everything else will take care of itself.
Yeah, Teddy Roosevelt, I completely agree with you, Kari. Teddy Roosevelt said comparison is the thief of joy. There's nothing more annoying than being at that cocktail party and some parent is bragging that their kid just wrote a symphony or cured cancer. And meanwhile, I'm like, well, my son just learned how to pick his nose with two fingers at the same time. You know, Last time I checked, when you apply to an Ivy League school, it doesn't ask when you learned how to read. You
Mhm.
know, General Patton, who's one of the most brilliant humans to live, he didn't learn how to read till he was in sixth grade, 12 years old. I mean, Albert Einstein, Thomas Edison, there's a lot of these people that I can go down the list where, they weren't, and I used to teach kindergarten. I can tell you, I had kindergartners that were my top students that were dealing drugs by middle school. And I had kindergartners that were eating paste that graduated valedictorian. I always tell kids, your story's still being written. It's not how you begin, it's how you finish. And so I really
Absolutely,
appreciate it.
absolutely. And one more thing before we take a break, Danny, I have to tell you this and share with our viewers. And if there are any people out there that were parents of students that I taught, and I'm actually working with a lot of my former students, my former second graders who are now in their 40s, and have their own kids. So that's really fun. But on parent night, I would ask the parents, I said, please look around. This is very important because I'm going to ask you to identify something. And they would all look around like, oh, what is she going to ask us? And I said, could you please tell me in this room who the early readers were? And they kind of got it, and there's just so much pressure. And parents might say, but they have to have pressure to get in, this group or that group, or this school or that school. It's more important that your children develop a love and a passion for reading, as you said, and it will take care of itself in terms of the levels.
Agreed. Amen.
Amen. Well, we'll change the world, Danny. And when we come back from our break, we're going to talk a little bit more about that and then delve right into what are the strategies that parents can do right away to encourage this with their children. We'll be right back. Our world has changed since you and I were little kids, and so many children have a screen in their hand most of the time, all of the time, some of the time. And so, as a reading expert, a global reading expert, what is your perspective of how this has changed our children in terms of the amount of time and the desire they have to read?
Well, I love that question, Kari, and I embrace change. I mean, General Eric Shinseki said, if you don't like change, you're going to like irrelevance even less. And he's absolutely right. Screens, I'm old fashioned. I like a real book. My wife, she loves her Kindle. Well, I can give you three reasons why electronic books are fantastic. I mean, first of all, we fly to Singapore, where my wife is from, every year. And while I'm packing 20 books in my bag, she's packing a 1 pound Kindle that has access to every book on the world. Second of all, I like to read in bed, and it drives my wife crazy because I have the lamp on, and she doesn't need a lamp because her Kindle illuminates itself. And third, and you would appreciate this, I'm getting older. I can't really read very well anymore. And some of these words on the printed page are very small. I don't have to worry on a Kindle because I can adjust the font size so it can become gigantic for somebody old like me. So the people that, again, this is why we have to expand the definition of literacy. The average kid today is seeing more text electronically in a single day than people growing up in the 18th century encountered their entire lifetime.
Yeah.
So I think embrace it. Let's use it to our advantage, is what I say.
Right, and absolutely, when you talk about, books on a Kindle, for example, or on a screen, some kids are also spending time on a screen that's not reading. It's, video games and things like that, and we all know that that can be pretty addictive to kids. Do you think that's taking away from time that maybe otherwise they would spend reading?
I don't know if the statistics actually, there's still studies being done on that, Carrie, but one of the studies I just saw that was that 80% of YouTube videos are watched without the sound on and they're closed caption. And so, and this is the, if we get into strategies for parents, one of the first
Let's
strategies
do
I
it. Let's
tell,
start. Let's start.
yeah,
Let's start.
well, so President Bush Sr., over 30 years ago, signed a very important law in the United States. It said every television set sold in America has to have closed captioning. So the first tip for strategy, I messed up again. First strategy I always recommend to parents is turn on the closed captioning on your television. And parents say, wait a sec, if the show is in English and the subtitles are in English, what good does that do? I'm like, well, that's a fair point. But let me make a point. Have you ever watched a show with subtitles and not looked at the subtitles? It's very difficult to do. And you know this as a brain expert. Your brain is actually directed towards that text. And there's actually research to support this. If you look at reading scores around the world, the more kids watch TV, the lower their reading scores are in every single country on the planet except for one. The country where kids watch the most TV also has the highest reading scores in the world. It's Finland. And
Mhm.
people always ask me, well, how can this be, Danny? I'm like, well, because Finland makes really bad TV shows. And so what they have to do is they import all these old American sitcoms like Happy Days and Gilligan's Island and Brady Bunch, and they subtitle them in Finnish. The kids are reading constantly. So that's a really quick strategy. I mean, I've worked always in the inner city, and, it's not like there's a lot in a lot of these homes. Parents will say, I have nothing to read at home. I'm like, oh, I haven't gone into any of their homes without seeing a television set. So that's something everybody can do. Another strategy I like to share with parents. I have 3 children of my own, and I I established the habit when they were very young because I have a feeling television is here to stay. And the kids can watch TV, but the price of admission is they have to bring me something to read. And so when they were very young, they would bring me picture books, children's picture books, and we'd read those together. Now they're all teenagers, and so maybe they'll bring me a newspaper article, or more likely they'll bring me their iPad with some silly story that they found on the iPad, and we'll read that together. And then they turn on the TV. And this is another strategy I tell parents. I mean, so I have 3 kids and a beautiful wife, and I have different books that I read with each of them. And so my oldest daughter, she's 19, she's into Game of Thrones, and so we've been reading the George R. R. Martin series, Fire and Ice, something like that. She loves it. And some of the language in these books isn't exactly what I like, but again, I try not to censor things from kids. I hope I've raised them well. My son, who's 18, he loves anything about the military, and so we've read books. Some of my favorite military books of all time, "The Killer Angels" by Michael Shira. I've given that book to 1,000 people, and they've all said it's one of the best books they've ever read. It's about the Battle of Gettysburg, and it's written from the points of view from the different players at Gettysburg. And then my wife, she loved the Outlander series by Diana Gabaldon, and so we read those together. Right now, we're reading this really cool series called The Unselected Journals of Emma M. Lyon by Beth Brower. They're just nice books, great characters, but that's a strategy all parents can do. And I included reading with my wife because that's very important for parents to understand is kids are watching us all the time. They're not stupid. They don't see us reading. They're never going to be reading. So we need to read in front of our kids as well. And I don't care what you read. Um, do I think you have to read other things? Absolutely. But you got to get the kid interested. If there's
Started.
one point I want your parents to get, find out if your kid loves dinosaurs, get dinosaur books. If they love monster trucks, get monster truck books. If they love the history of the state of Arizona, give them the history of the state. I mean, kids like different things.
Absolutely. And so far, you've given us so many wonderful strategies, the closed captioning on the TV. You've given us the idea that, what, different people, obviously, we don't want to read a book we're not interested in, and to respect that and honor that with our children and expose them to a lot of things, to read with them, to have them see us reading. And, I would like to just expand on something you said about that. And not just reading at reading time, but even at the dinner table, talking about, oh my gosh, this book I'm reading is so amazing. I can't wait to get to the next part. It might sound kind of corny, but our kids are listening.
Well, I completely agree. I always, you know, I'm in a lot of airports because I travel around the world to speak, and I'm in a lot of TSA lines, and I'm always behind the same guy who's sitting there. He's like, "Oh, this line is taking forever." I'm like, "Really? It's a government agency. Who knew?" I never freak out in line because I have this thing in my pocket called an iPhone, and so like one of my little, when used properly, this can be a wonderful teaching tool. So most people waste time on social media, which I don't like to do, and so what I'll do is I have reminders every single day. And so, like, I'm trying to learn different pieces of scripture. And so, like, every day at 4:08 in the morning, because I get up at 4 every morning, but I begin my day with Philippians 4:8. I'm trying to learn, which is finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. Okay, so that's what I'll do. I read the book Dune, and there's a great thing called the Litany Against Fear in Dune. So every day at 9:11, I have a reminder, to review Dune. I must not fear. Fear is the mind killer. I'll give parents the strategy I give to teachers all the time: use poetry. I mean, every day I read aloud at least 4 poems to my students. It takes me less than 5 minutes. Think about that, teachers. Over the course of 180 school days, I've exposed my students to over 700 poems. I mean, I mandate all of my students have to memorize at least 20 poems. And when I taught kindergarten, on Thursdays, my kids would become poems. It's a great way to differentiate instructions. Then I got like Laura, one of my top students. She's like, "Hi, I'm Mark Antony from Julius Caesar by William Shakespeare. Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. I come to bury Caesar, not to praise them. The evil that men do lose after them. The good is often interred with their bones. So let be with Caesar." 6-year-old girl memorized 50 lines from Julius Caesar. I got that idea watching the movie Kindergarten Cop. When I saw that movie, I'm like, Schwarzenegger got his kindergartners to memorize the Gettysburg Address. I'm like, I wonder if that's possible. I started trying. I'm like, we underestimate kids all the time. So that's the strategy. Read aloud. I like funny poems. I tell kids, you have the rest of your life to be miserable. This year we're laughing. So I like lots of funny poems. So I love Shel Silverstein. I love Broad Baggart, Jack Prelutsky. I want people laughing. The world's too dim most of the time.
It's all about enjoyment and, again, creating that passion. And so I'm sure that some of our viewers out there can think of even more strategies that they've seen or they've done. And we hope that those are helpful. And when we come back, we're going to take 2 questions from our viewers and answer more questions. We'll be right back. This is the part of our show where we try to answer questions from our viewers, and I like to call it your parenting destination. Danny, we have 2 questions today, and the first question comes from Pat K from Phoenix, and we already touched on part of this, but not the other part. My son is in 2nd grade and is dyslexic. He feels frustrated about his reading, but mostly because his brother, who is in kindergarten, is already reading at a higher level than he is. What suggestions do you have about how I can handle this so that my older son doesn't feel stupid about his reading ability?
Well, thanks for the question, Pat. And second, first of all, your kids, again, it's we love to label kids at a very early age. I'm like, if you're going to take all the effort to label a kid, just label them a genius. It's the most important thing is that a person like Pat, when I have them in the audience, that's always the first question: how can I help my kid?
I would also encourage parents, along with everything you just said, to teach children that, and I'm going to do a whole class on this, a whole other show on this, but we have something called the multiple intelligences. And that means that we have at least 8 different pathways that our brain processes information. And so, just to say, what, I can't do such and such very well, it doesn't mean I'm stupid. It means I have to do it another way. And so, as you said before about, you can listen to books, audible books, read aloud books, and really, really, really focus on that child's strengths and their superpowers of what they can do, and just create an environment within your family about, isn't it wonderful that we're all different and we can all do different things well and we all struggle with different things. So
That is so well said, Kari. I mean, like it's all about your mindset. I mean, I hired a nutrition coach this year to get me finally fit because I have all these bad habits. And he said something which was great. He said, Danny, this isn't about losing weight. This is about gaining years. See, he reframed it in a different way. So Pat, with your son, you know, it's all about you. And I love what you said, Kari. We should be celebrating that we're all. That's why I love the United States of America. We should be so happy we're all different. If we were all the same, a global
yeah,
pandemic would have wiped us all out. But we're all
exactly.
different, and we should be celebrating that every day.
Exactly. So Pat, I hope that helps. Our second question, Danny, is from Fran in Atlanta. And Fran writes, as a parent, and we talked about this a little bit, as a parent, I feel like there's so much pressure with the other parents, always comparing their kids' reading levels and that everything becomes a competition. It makes me crazy. Do you find this everywhere? And is my child going to suffer in life if they aren't in the top reading group? What can I do? And again, we addressed this a little bit, but what else would you like to say?
Well, Fran, thank you. And you're not alone. I mean, I hate this. It drives me nuts. I love reading biographies of successful people. And it's fascinating because most of these biographies have one common characteristic. These people all dropped out of school. I'm like, what's going on in school? All these geniuses were not identified in school, but then they blossom at later years. I don't think President Biden went to an Ivy League school. I don't believe that most of the important CEOs actually, I was just reading a study on this about how so many of these CEOs, oh, this was kind of fascinating. This is actually a statistical fact I just read that this university that produces the most CEOs is the University of Wisconsin, which is also considered one of the biggest party schools in America. So don't worry, Fran. I hate that when you got the obnoxious parents. It's kind of like when I was in sixth grade, I was 5 feet tall and 160 pounds. And when I was in 12th grade, I was 6 feet tall and 180 pounds. I literally went from meatball to spaghetti. And I don't let anybody tell you what you can't do. That's what kids blossom at different times. And I mean, I used to tell my kindergartners, I hope to God this isn't the best year of your life. I'm like, I hope it's next year. And the year after that, the windshield's a whole lot bigger than the rear view mirror. I mean, I have guys I played high school football with that still talk about when we played high school football together. I mean, there's so many. Don't worry about it, Fran. And I'll give you my phone number. We can have our own support group. I hate it when people feel down because of other people putting down where your
Yeah.
child is.
And in addition to that, I think also using that again as a springboard for conversation about, how does it make you feel when other people compare? And getting children to understand that, what you said earlier, comparison is the thief of joy. And to use any of these situations as, topics for conversation and insightful learning. And so, Danny, I wish we had more time. We are almost out of time. I'm sure that our viewers are going to want to know, how can we find out more about you? And you talked about a complimentary ebook. Please share with us how our viewers can find you.
Yeah, so as a thank you for bearing with me and listening to me today, I just wanted to give everybody a couple of freebies. First of all, when you go to freegiftfromdanny.com, again, freegiftfromdanny.com, I'm going to give everybody a copy of my book, Read, Lead, and Succeed. This is a book I wrote for a school principal who was trying to keep his faculty and staff positively engaged. So I said, okay, I'll write you a book. So every week I give you a concept, an inspirational quote, an inspirational story, a book recommendation on a book you should read, but you're probably too lazy because you're an adult. So I also give you a children's picture book recommendation, demonstrates the same concept. You can read that in 5 minutes. I'm also going to give everybody access to a 5-day reading challenge I did online for about 700 parents around the world last summer, where every day for a week, I'll give you an hour of strategies on how to get your kid to read more, read better, and most importantly, to love reading. That's at freegiftfromdanny.com. And I really appreciate you having me today, Kari. And I just love what you're doing, and I hope you keep on doing it.
Well, thank you so much for being here. And I hope everybody takes advantage of your offer. And it has been a joy to get to know you. I've been listening to some of your other YouTube videos and some podcasts, and I knew I had to have you on this show when I learned about you. And so thank you again for accepting my invitation. And I'd like to end our time together today with a quote from you, Danny. And I have lots of quotes from you, and I'm going to choose this one for today because I think it's universal. It doesn't matter what you read. What matters is how much you read, and to remind parents, you know what, as you said, it's every step that they take, every book that they read is a stepping stone to the next thing. I can't thank you enough.
Thanks, Kari. God bless.
You too.